Standing before the emergency room mirror, Elena touched the bruises on her wrist, not from physical violence, but from the ice-cold grip of her mother-in-law as she was shoved out of the mansion into a blinding Chicago snowstorm. Timothy, the husband she once worshipped, just stood there checking his watch, complaining that this divorce was delaying his new fund's launch. He called her a failed gold digger and tossed her purse into the mud. But inside that tattered bag, hidden among her meager belongings, was an old letter from her late father, a man Timothy dismissed as a common laborer. He didn't know that letter contained a key and a truth that would turn his financial empire into ash at the hands of the woman he just threw away. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Things didn't start with this much hate. It began 3 years ago, when Elena believed she had finally found her prince in the heart of Chicago. Back then, Timothy Harris was the rising star of the city's financial district. He was charming, ambitious, and seemingly perfect. When he proposed, Elena thought her life was finally beginning. But the honeymoon period died the moment she moved into the Harris family estate. She quickly realized she wasn't a wife. She was an accessory, a placeholder. Her mother-in-law, Beatrice, made sure Elena never forgot her place. Every dinner was an interrogation. Every choice of clothing was a critique. Beatrice viewed Elena's working-class background as a stain on their pristine lineage. To them, she was just a poor girl who got lucky. And Timothy, he never defended her. He sat at the head of the table, silent or worse, joining in on the subtle jabs. He was a cold-hearted husband who valued his mother's approval and his family's reputation far more than his wife's dignity. The family pressure in marriage became an agonizing weight. Elena tried everything to fit in. She quit her job, changed her hair, and learned the complex social etiquette of the elite. But the more she gave, the more they took. They treated her like invisible furniture in her own home. The breaking point arrived on the night of the year's biggest blizzard. Elena had just confirmed she was 3 months pregnant. She thought the news would change everything. She thought a child would finally earn her the respect she deserved. Instead, she walked into the study and found Timothy and Beatrice huddled with a lawyer. They weren't planning a nursery. They were planning an exit strategy. Timothy's firm was bleeding capital, and he needed to secure a merger with a wealthy heiress from the Sterling family. Elena was no longer useful. In fact, she was an obstacle. When she confronted them, Beatrice didn't even flinch. She grabbed Elena by the arm, her fingers like iron, and marched her toward the door. Timothy watched, his eyes void of soul. He told her the marriage was a mistake, that she was ungrateful for the lifestyle he had provided. He didn't care about the child in her womb. He only cared about the clock. He had a flight to catch, a deal to close, and a new life to start, one that didn't include a nobody. Thrown out into the freezing night, Elena found herself in a cheap motel on the edge of the city. Her body ached, and her heart felt shattered beyond repair. She reached into her bag to find her phone, but her fingers brushed against the thick, yellowed envelope she had kept for years. It was the letter her father had given her on his deathbed, with strict instructions to only open it if she ever felt truly lost. Timothy had always laughed at her father's memory, calling him a grease monkey who died with nothing. Elena wiped her tears and broke the wax seal. As she read the first few lines, the room seemed to grow still. Her father wasn't just a mechanic, and the worthless letter in her hand held the power to strip Timothy Harris of everything he held dear. Elena looked at her reflection in the cracked motel mirror. The invisible wife was gone. In her place was a woman with a legacy, a mission, and a debt that was finally due. Elena clutched the yellowed envelope to her chest, the cold from the motel room seeping into her bones. The document inside wasn't just paper. It was a map to a past she never knew existed. Her father, a man Timothy had mocked for his grease-stained overalls, had left her a legacy that the Harris family had built their entire throne upon. He had been the lead engineer for the technology that Timothy's firm now marketed as their proprietary miracle. Timothy hadn't just married her for a shield against investors. His family had been hiding a decades-old theft from her father. She remembered the day she moved into the Harris estate. Beatrice had welcomed her with a smile that never reached her eyes, immediately handing her a thick stack of papers. It was an ironclad post-nuptial agreement. Beatrice claimed it was just a formality to protect generational wealth, but the terms were predatory. Elena was barred from claiming any share of the company or the estate, and even her future children's inheritance was tied to behavioral clauses determined by the family matriarch. Timothy had leaned over her shoulder, whispering that it was just to keep his mother happy. "It doesn't change us, Elena," he'd lied. But it had changed everything. From that moment, Elena became an invisible wife, a ghost drifting through hallways filled with portraits of people who looked down on her. She was forced to attend gala after gala, standing by Timothy's side like a piece of designer furniture while he flirted openly with Simone Sterling. The humiliation was a slow poison. Beatrice would often call her into the study just to remind her that she was replaceable. Once, when Elena was nauseous from her early pregnancy, Beatrice refused to let her leave the dinner table during a meeting with investors. She told Elena that a woman of her background should be grateful to even sit at such a table. Timothy had watched his wife turn pale and said nothing. He only checked his watch, annoyed that her discomfort was a distraction. But as Elena sat in the dim light of the motel, she realized Timothy's arrogance was his greatest weakness. He had dismissed her as a failed gold digger because he truly believed she had nothing. He didn't know that she had been observing. She had seen the frantic late-night calls he took in his office. She had noticed the way he flinched when the quarterly reports arrived. Timothy wasn't the titan he pretended to be. He was a man drowning in debt, desperately trying to trade his wife for the Sterling family's checkbook. The realization brought a strange, cold peace to her heart. Her father had once told her that a lock is only as strong as the person trying to break it. Timothy had tried to break her, but he had forgotten one crucial detail. He had locked her out of his house, but he had left the keys to his empire in her tattered bag. She picked up the motel phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. It belonged to Ben, Timothy's former partner, who had been pushed out of the firm for being too ethical. She knew Ben held the missing pieces of the puzzle. When he answered, her voice didn't shake. "Ben, it's Elena. I have the letter. And I think it's time we talk about what Timothy's father stole 20 years ago." As she waited for him to respond, she looked down at the forged medical file she had found hidden in Timothy's briefcase weeks ago. It was a plan to strip her of her parental rights, labeling her as mentally unstable to ensure she could never fight back after the divorce. They weren't just trying to leave her. They were trying to erase her existence. Elena touched her belly, feeling a faint flutter. They wanted a war, and for the first time, she was ready to give them one. She was no longer just a wife. She was the woman holding the detonator to the Harris legacy. Elena sat in a quiet, dimly lit diner on the outskirts of Chicago, facing Ben. He stared at the yellowed envelope with a complex expression, his hands tightly interlaced in a display of visible tension. Ben was the only one who had dared to stand up to the Harris family, and as a result, he had lost his entire career in the cutthroat financial world. He took a deep breath, his voice dropping to a low, bitter tone as he recalled the past. Timothy and his father weren't just businessmen, Elena. They were predators, Ben said, his eyes flashing with a steely resolve. He began to explain the first layer of the secret. Elena's father was not the poor laborer Timothy constantly mocked. He was a brilliant engineer who had laid the groundwork for the core trading algorithm that the Harris Group now used to rake in billions annually. 20 years ago, Timothy's father had orchestrated a sham patent lawsuit, driving her father into bankruptcy and stealing that technology outright. Elena felt her heart tighten, a mix of pain and fury surging through her chest. She looked down at the letter, which contained original intellectual property certificates her father had hidden away as a final card to play. It turned out that every humiliation she suffered in the Harris mansion wasn't just because she was poor, but because they were afraid. They were terrified that one day she would uncover this truth. Ben pushed another folder toward her, his face set with determination. It contained records regarding a worthless plot of land her father had left in his will. Timothy had always called it a junk pile, but Ben revealed that the state of Illinois was planning to rezone that exact area as a major logistics hub. Its value wasn't in the thousands anymore. It was worth tens of millions. Elena gripped the letter, her eyes no longer carrying the sorrow of a victim. She realized she held the key to destroying the very empire that had trampled her dignity. 2 days later, Elena appeared at the gates of the Harris estate. She no longer looked like the disheveled woman from the night of the storm. She wore an old but neat coat, her face strangely calm. Beatrice, her mother-in-law, stood in the foyer with her usual sneer, shocked that Elena dared to return after being tossed out like trash. "Are you back to beg for money? Or to sign the papers relinquishing your parental rights?" Beatrice asked, her voice as cold as a blade. Timothy stepped out of his office, looking at Elena with exhaustion and impatience. He coldly informed her she would be moving to a cramped apartment in a dilapidated district to save family costs, a move clearly meant to clear a path for Simone Sterling. Elena played her part perfectly, bowing her head in feigned submission. She agreed to move but asked for 3 days to pack her belongings. During that time, she secretly used a recording device Ben had provided. She gathered horrifying evidence. Timothy was mortgaging the very mansion they stood in for a ghost project to hide massive capital losses. The betrayal ran deeper than money. Elena overheard a conversation between Beatrice and a private doctor. They were planning to bribe him to create a falsified psychiatric record for Elena, intending to prove she was mentally incompetent the moment the baby was born. Their cruelty was beyond anything she had imagined. They didn't just want her gone, they wanted to erase her existence. On her final night, Elena sat in Timothy's old study while he was out at a gala with Simone. She looked directly into a hidden security camera she had discovered in the ceiling. Timothy had always watched her like a prisoner. She gave a soft, knowing smile to the lens, a smile of pure disgust and pity for the man about to lose everything. Tomorrow was Timothy's public engagement to Sterling, and it was also the day Elena Harris would disappear so that the real owner of the Harris legacy could finally step into the light. She walked out of the mansion, leaving a short note on the tea table. A 20-year debt is finally due with interest. The neon sign of the roadside diner hummed with a low electric buzz that matched the vibration in Elena's chest. Across the grease-stained table, Ben, the man Timothy had discarded like a broken tool, stared at her father's letter with wide, disbelieving eyes. He didn't just see a mechanic's last words. He saw the missing blueprint of a financial heist that had lasted 2 decades. Ben took a ragged breath, his voice dropping to a low, bitter whisper as he looked around to ensure they weren't being watched. Elena, your father wasn't just a laborer. He was the lead engineer for the technology the Harris Group calls their proprietary miracle. Ben's hands trembled as he pointed to the diagrams in the envelope. He revealed that 20 years ago, Timothy's father hadn't built a dynasty through genius. He'd built it through theft. They had orchestrated a sham patent lawsuit that bankrupted her father and stole his life's work, a revolutionary trading algorithm that now raked in billions. Every luxury Timothy used to look down on her was paid for with a debt of blood and brilliance they thought she would never find. Ben pushed a second folder toward her, detailing a worthless plot of land in her father's will. It wasn't a junk pile. It was situated exactly where the state of Illinois was secretly rezoning for a multi-billion-dollar logistics hub. Its value wasn't in the thousands, it was worth tens of millions. Elena gripped the table, the sorrow of a victim finally hardening into the cold resolve of an owner. She realized she didn't just have a letter, she had the detonator to the Harris legacy. 2 days later, Elena appeared at the gates of the Harris estate. She no longer looked like the broken woman tossed into the snow. She wore an old but perfectly pressed coat, her posture radiating a calm authority that made the security guards hesitate. Beatrice met her in the foyer, her sneer already practiced. Back for scraps, Elena? Or are you finally ready to sign the papers relinquishing your rights to the baby? Beatrice asked, her voice like ice water. Timothy walked out of his office, barely glancing up from his phone as he checked the time. He coldly informed her she would be moving to a cramped apartment downtown to reduce overhead, a transparent excuse to clear her out for Simone Sterling's arrival. Elena didn't argue. She played the part of the submissive wife perfectly, bowing her head while her mind recorded every word. She asked for 3 days to collect her things, a request Beatrice granted with a dismissive wave. Elena didn't spend those days packing clothes. Using a discreet recording device, she captured a conversation that chilled her to the core. Beatrice was meeting with a private doctor, discussing a plan to drug Elena after her delivery to have her declared mentally incompetent so the family could seize total control of the child. They didn't just want her gone, they wanted her erased from the baby's life forever. On her final night, Elena stood in the darkened study, looking directly into a hidden security camera in the smoke detector. She knew Timothy was watching, and for the first time she allowed herself a small, knowing smile. She left a single note on the mahogany tea table before walking out. The interest on a 20-year debt is finally due. Tomorrow was the Harris engagement party, and Elena was ready to burn their empire down with the truth. But as she stepped into the night, she realized someone had followed her from the diner. The shadow moved just as Elena reached the edge of the sidewalk, a heavy silhouette detaching itself from the dark brick of a Chicago alleyway. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't run. She recognized the walk. It was Ben. He looked frantic, his breath coming in white plumes as he caught up to her. "Elena? Wait," he hissed, glancing nervously at the passing cars. "I found something else in the encrypted files your father left. It's not just about the patent theft." Timothy is liquidating the company's backup reserves into offshore accounts in Simone Sterling's name. Nausea rolled over her, but it wasn't from the pregnancy. Timothy wasn't just replacing her. He was emptying the vault before the building burned down, planning to flee with Simone and leave Elena to take the fall for his financial crimes. Ben pressed a small blue USB drive into her palm. Everything is here, the wire transfers, the forged signatures, the logs from the hidden camera he used to film your episodes. Elena gripped the drive until it bit into her skin. He had been filming her for months, creating a digital record of her instability to use in a competency hearing. The next morning, the grand ballroom of the Harris estate was a sea of silk and artificial smiles. Timothy stood at the center, a glass of vintage champagne in one hand and Simone Sterling on his arm. Beatrice hovered nearby, acting like a queen mother finally rid of a peasant infection. They thought they had won. They thought the invisible wife was currently sobbing in a roach-infested studio across town. They had no idea that the woman standing at the back of the room, dressed in a sharp, tailored black suit, was the one holding the keys to their prison cells. Elena waited until the music dimmed and the regional director stood up to announce the engagement. The room went silent, the elite of Chicago leaning in to toast the merger of two fortunes. That's when she stepped into the light. Her voice didn't shake, it cut through the air like a blade. "I'm afraid this engagement is based on a lie," she said. Her eyes locked on Timothy's pale, frozen face. She didn't wait for them to respond. She didn't give Beatrice the chance to scream. She looked up at the large projector screen intended for a romantic montage of the new couple. "Timothy, I think our guests would be more interested in seeing how you've been managing the family assets," she said, her finger hovering over her phone screen. As the first page of the forged ledger appeared for everyone to see, Elena realized that the hardest part of betrayal wasn't the pain. It was the acting, and her performance was finally over. Suddenly, the grand doors at the entrance were kicked open by men in dark suits with badges. But they weren't looking for the unstable wife. They were looking for the man at the altar. The crystal chandeliers overhead pulsed with a rhythmic, expensive light that made Elena's head throb. But she stood her ground at the back of the ballroom. The room was a sea of Chicago's elite, all gathered to witness Timothy Harris pledge his life to Simone Sterling, a woman whose pedigree matched his ambition. Elena watched them from the shadows, her hand resting protectively on her 8-month pregnancy, the only real thing left in a world built on theft and gaslighting. She wasn't just the invisible wife anymore. She was the ghost of every lie they had told to build their empire. Beatrice Harris took the stage, her voice like honey mixed with glass as she praised her son's genius and the Harris family legacy. Timothy stood beside her, smirking with the same practiced tenderness he once used while stirring honey into Elena's chamomile tea he had laced with sedatives to erase her mind. Elena felt a surge of cold, sharp focus. She knew that while Timothy was celebrating, his offshore accounts were already flagged, and the worthless land he had laughed at was being revealed as a multi-million-dollar logistics hub. As the regional director stepped up to finalize the toast, Elena walked into the center of the light. The room went silent, the elite leaning in as they recognized the woman Beatrice had claimed was unstable and destitute. Elena didn't shout, she didn't need to. Her voice was measured and heavy with the weight of 20 years of stolen brilliance. "I'm afraid this merger is based on a fraud that started long before tonight," she said, her eyes locked on Timothy's pale, frozen face. She pulled her phone from her pocket, and instead of a romantic montage, the massive projector screen flickered to life with something else. It showed the Harris Group's trading platform algorithm, the one her father had designed before they bankrupted him with a sham lawsuit. Below it, a video played Beatrice Harris in a dimly lit study, detailing a plan to drug Elena after her delivery, to declare her mentally incompetent and seize the child. The gasp that rippled through the ballroom was a sound Elena would remember for the rest of her life. Suddenly, the grand mahogany doors were kicked open. Men in dark suits with federal badges moved through the crowd. But they didn't look for the broken wife. They walked straight to Timothy and Beatrice. Handcuffs clicked in the silence that followed. Elena stood tall, her dignity restored by the truth, watching as the house of cards finally collapsed. She had reclaimed father's legacy, but as the officers led them away, she saw Simone Sterling slip a small black vial into her purse and vanish through the side exit. The ballroom descended into absolute chaos as the federal agents moved with surgical precision. Timothy Harris sat slumped in a gilded chair, the smug mask of a billionaire heir, replaced by the gray pallor of a man who realized his escape hatch had just been welded shut. Beatrice shrieked about reputation and insults, but her voice was quickly muffled by the heavy thud of evidence boxes being seized from the Harris estate. Elena watched them, not with the burning rage she expected, but with a profound, quiet pity. She touched her belly, feeling a strong, steady kick that grounded her in a reality the Harris family had tried so hard to poison. "You should have just let me go, Timothy," Elena whispered as he was led past her, his wrists bound in cold steel. He didn't look at her. He couldn't face the woman who had forensic accounted his entire life into a dossier of federal crimes. Beatrice was escorted out next, her pearls clashing against her designer suit as she struggled against the officers, a pathetic end for a woman who mistook cruelty for class. Elena realized then that the prison door had been unlocked for her all along. She just needed the courage to walk through it and take the key. Ben stood near the foyer, nodding toward Elena as the crowd of Chicago's elite dispersed in hushed, terrified whispers. The Harris Group wasn't just a business, it was a crime scene now. Using the resources Ben had uncovered, Elena's attorney began the process of reclaiming the trading algorithm her father had died for. It wasn't about the $33 million or the logistics hub anymore. It was about dignity, the simple, unshakable right to exist without being erased by someone else's greed. 3 weeks later, Elena sat in the quiet of her new apartment, the air clear and the tea in her hand just tea, no vials, no secrets, and no fear. She looked at the sonogram on her desk, then at the news report flashing on her laptop. Timothy and Beatrice were facing 15 to 20 years for wire fraud, patent theft, and conspiracy. But as she breathed in the peace of her own space, a knock at the door made her freeze. She checked the security feed on her phone. It was Simone Sterling. She wasn't wearing her usual silk and diamonds. She looked disheveled, her eyes darting nervously down the hallway. She held a small black velvet box in her hand, the same one she had snatched from the Harris study during the raid. "Elena, please open the door," Simone whispered, her voice cracking through the speaker. "You think you won, but you don't know the last secret Timothy's father left in the vault." Elena stood behind the reinforced security door, her breath hitching as she watched Simone's frantic reflection in the monitor. The woman who had once pranced through the Harris ballroom as the worthy replacement now looked like a hunted animal, clutching a velvet box that shouldn't have existed. Elena felt a surge of caution, her forensic mind already scanning for a trap, but there was something in Simone's eyes, a raw, jagged terror that didn't look performed. Elena slowly disarmed the deadbolt and opened the door just an inch, keeping the safety chain engaged. "What do you want, Simone?" Elena asked, stripped of the foggy wife persona she had worn like a shroud for months. Simone didn't sneer. She didn't mock Elena's modest apartment. Instead, she shoved the black box through the gap in the door. "Timothy's father didn't just steal the algorithm, Elena," Simone whispered, her voice trembling. "He kept a second ledger, a list of everyone who helped him bury your father. It's not just about money anymore, it's about blood." Elena took the box, the weight of it heavy in her palm. Inside sat a single old-fashioned brass key and a handwritten note from Timothy's father, dated the night of her father's accidental death. The note detailed a private vault at the Chicago International Bank, one Timothy didn't even know existed. Simone leaned in closer, her face pale. "They're coming for me because I took it during the raid. If I stay with the Harris family, I'm a witness. If I leave, I'm a target. You're the only one with the legal standing to open that vault and end this for good." Elena looked at the key, then back at the woman who had tried to steal her life. She saw the rot of the Harris legacy reaching out to consume Simone just as it had tried to erase her. In that moment, Elena didn't feel the need for more revenge. She felt a profound sense of responsibility to her father's memory and to the child moving restlessly in her womb. She realized that justice wasn't just about putting people in cages. It was about ensuring the cycle of theft and silence finally stopped. "Go to the authorities, Simone. Tell them everything about the offshore accounts," Elena said, her voice softening with a touch of pity. "I'll handle the vault." As Simone vanished into the rainy Chicago night, Elena sat at her kitchen table, the brass key glinting under the light. She knew the final reckoning wasn't at the engagement party. It was hidden in a dark box beneath the city streets. She picked up her phone to call Ben, but a new notification flashed on the screen, a message from an encrypted number. It was a photo of her front door, taken only seconds ago. Someone else was already outside. The iron gates of the Harris estate no longer looked like the bars of a golden cage. Now, they were simply the entrance to a home Elena had reclaimed with the truth. The spring breeze in Chicago carried the scent of blooming magnolias, a sharp, sweet contrast to the bitter winter night when she had been tossed into the snow like trash. Elena sat in the garden pavilion, her hand resting on the gentle, moving weight of her pregnancy. She was no longer the foggy wife drugged into submission. She was a woman whose mind was as clear as the afternoon sky. The bank vault Simone had revealed was the final nail in the Harris coffin. Inside, the dead man's hand protocol her father had designed didn't just contain money. It held a final letter addressed to her. Her father revealed that every trading algorithm, every piece of brilliance the Harris family claimed, was a love letter to her mother. He had built a kingdom of logic to ensure they would never be small, never be invisible. Timothy and Beatrice hadn't just stolen a patent. They had tried to steal a man's devotion to his family. Ben walked across the manicured lawn, carrying 2 cups of tea. He didn't approach as a hero or a savior, but as a man who had finally earned his own peace by standing beside her. He handed her a cup, just plain chamomile, no blue vials, no hidden traps. "The lawyers called," Ben said softly, sitting on the bench opposite her. "The asset transfers are finalized. The Harris name is officially a footnote in the history of your father's brilliance." Elena nodded, but she didn't feel the rush of victory she once expected. Revenge had provided justice, but it hadn't provided healing that had come from the quiet moments of reclaiming her dignity. She looked at the pen and paper on the table before her. She was writing a letter to her child, one they would read years from now, when they asked about the man who was their biological father. "You are born from brilliance and blood," she wrote. "But your real inheritance isn't the millions in the bank or the land the state wants to buy. It is the knowledge that your worth can never be dictated by people who mistake cruelty for power. I was once an invisible wife, a victim of a man who loved what I owned more than who I was. But I learned that the greatest vault in the world is the one you build around your own self-respect." Timothy was now a gray ghost in a county jail, a lesson in how greed erases a man's soul. Beatrice's shrieks about reputation had been silenced by a court-supervised audit that left her, with nothing but the pearls she had used to humiliate others. They were gone, and with them, the fear that had once defined Elena's breath. Elena looked up at the Chicago skyline, the same view her father had loved. She realized that while Thor tried to write her ending in a cold alley, she had taken the pen back and written a beginning. She was no longer the woman being pursued through the dark. She was the one walking toward the light, finally free. If you believe that a person's dignity is worth more than any empire, please hit the like button and share your own journey of resilience in the comments below. Join our community by subscribing to witness more stories of pride, justice, and the ultimate reversal of